What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. The Darkworld structure deck is out and now we have the update that everyone has been waiting for. This is a really good deck that we can have now the potential to play in this Tier 0 format, and if Konami doesn't want to solve the format by just giving us a good ban list, then maybe adding some more variety is the trick. And yeah, this deck is actually a deck that can do some work in this format. It does have some unfortunate interactions and the timing of the structure deck is also a bit unfortunate, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But again, if you're a fan of this deck, and I know that this deck has a really big fan base, it's a very nostalgic deck for a lot of us because it has been in the meta so many years ago, and Konami tried to revitalize the deck once before, but this time they did a really good job with the cards that they created, so we can now have a new deck we can play with and a fan favorite for that. So before we begin, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the deck, we have one of the new cards. We have 2 copies of Rainbow over King of Darkworld. Now, this is one of the new cards that is basically very similar to Grapha. We all know what Grapha does. It's a monster that is going to keep summoning itself on the field from the graveyard. So this card, not only does it have a similar effect, but it's also a searcher. So you can special summon this card from the grave by returning a level 7 or lower Darkworld monster you control to the hand. So pretty much very similar to Grapha, but you can return any Darkworld. It has to be a lower level Darkworld, but it doesn't matter because you have so many ways of getting them into the field. And if this card is discarded to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add a level 5 or higher Darkworld monster from your deck to your hand. So this card can give you access to Grapha, it can give you access to Silva, which is a really good card because you have many ways of making your opponent discarding cards from your hand. So Silva's secondary effect for hand looping 2 cards is really good. And if this card is discarded to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon level 4 or lower Darkworld monster from your deck to either field. So you can either summon Ceruli to your opponent's field, you can summon a monster to your own field, maybe a level 4 monster to be able to go into an Abyss Dweller. So yeah, this card does a lot for the deck. The reason you don't really want to max out on all of these cards is because the higher level monsters, unless you have a way to discard them, they don't really do much. But the lower level monsters, you can sometimes normal summon them to get them back to summon Graph or Rainbow. You can normal summon them to go into a Link monster, into an Xyz monster. They do have some more utility than just being discard fodder to get powerful effects, so that's why we played 2 Rainbow. With the same logic, we played 2 copies of Grapha. Now that this card is searchable through another card directly with Rainbow, it's not really necessary to play 3. Before, back in the day, you would definitely play 3 Grapha, but now that not only do we have a way to search it, but we also have the danger monsters to dig through our deck very quickly, we don't really need to play 3 copies because again, it's a card that you can easily get back from the graveyard as many times as you need to. So even if one gets banished with Didi Grow, having the second one means that you're going to have a guarantee play every single turn by returning a Darkworld. And yeah, this card is also the spot removal of the deck because when it's discarded, you can destroy 1 card your opponent's control, and if it's discarded by a card effect from your opponents, you can look at a random card from your opponent's hand, and if it's a monster, you special summon it to your field. So these secondary effects come up more often than they used to because of cards like Ceruli and some other cards that got printed in the structure deck, so we need to be able to utilize them to their best. We have 2 copies of Silva, Warlord of Darkworld. Now this is a card that before it used to be just a free special summon, so it was a card that was very outshot by Beige because it was a level 4 monster, and this card is a level 5, so it doesn't really do much when you have it in your hand without a discard. But the thing about this card is that its secondary effect is one of the most powerful of the deck. If this card is discarded to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, not only are you going to special summon it, but your opponent returns 2 cards from their hand to the bottom of the deck. So if you can use this effect twice throughout a single turn, which is not even that difficult, then your opponent is going to start their turn with 2 cards in their hand, and against your board is going to be basically impossible to overcome it. So yeah, this card's secondary effect makes it worthy of playing in the deck because cards like Gold and Beige, they do special summon themselves, but they don't have such powerful secondary effects. So yeah, this card takes the cake when it comes to the free special that summons itself when it gets discarded. Next up, we have another one of the new cards, 3 copies Gentai Getman of Darkworld. Now, this card is an amazing addition to the deck. So, you know, Gates of Darkworld is an amazing piece of support that we got back in the day in the old structure deck. So we didn't really have a consistent way of searching the card and not a way of getting it prepared to use its effect very early. This card solves both of those issues for the deck. So this card is basically a Harpy Queen for Gates of Darkworld. You can send it to the graveyard to search the field spell, but also what it does is that it puts a fiend in the graveyard right away, so we can use Gates effect immediately. And also if this card is banished, you can special summon it. So yeah, this card is really good. So you can special summon it as a level 4 monster to go for a card like Abyss Dweller, which is a monster of a card in this particular format, and it gives you the card you banish in the graveyard. So yeah, it's a card that sets up your plays perfectly, and it's a definite 3 of in the. We have 3 copies of Snow on Light of Darkworld. This is the searcher of the deck. When she's discarded, you can search for any Darkworld card, and the fact that it doesn't search only monsters monsters is really good, because before it was only searching cards when it came to spell and traps like dealings and gates, but now we have more good spell cards to play in the deck, especially the fusion spell that allows us to get more interruptions on the field, trigger our monster effects in the hand, and also recycle itself for a follow-up play. So yeah, this card is another 3-of, because when you discard it, you're going to plus. We play 3 copies of Brow, Huntsman of Darkworld. This is the standard card. We've seen this card in a lot of FTKs lately, even though Darkworlds were not being played as an archetype. This card was being played in danger variants for a lot of decks, just because when it's discarded, it's a free draw. So when you combine this with a danger card, it comes a +2 because you get the danger on the field. You draw 1 with a danger, and you draw 1 with Brow. So yeah, this card is another 3-of in the deck. Now, moving on to some 1 of Darkworld monsters. This is a new card. We play 1 copy of Parle Hermit of Darkworld. This card, if it's discarded, you can target a Darkworld monster in your graveyard, except itself, and you special summon it to either field. And being able to special summon to either field is really good, because if Ceruli is in the graveyard, you can special summon it to your opponent's field. And also, if this card is discarded to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon to either field one of your fiend monsters that is banished in your hand or graveyard, so you can even get another extender. So yeah, this card is a decent 1-of. You're going to see it regardless, because the deck does draw like crazy. If you need to search it, you have Snow, so it doesn't really matter that you only play 1. It's not a card that is going to do you too much when you discard it early. You want to see it mid and late throughout the combo. And we also play 1 copy of Ceruli, Guru of Darkworld. This card is the reason Silva is such a good card in this particular version of the deck right now, just because we have this card that you can special summon it to your opponent's field when it's discarded by a card effect, and then you can discard 1 Darkworld card from your hand, but since it's an effect coming from your opponent's side of the field, that's how you trigger the secondary effects of your Darkworld. So yeah, this card is really good. And also, this card prevents your opponent from being able to summon Fenrir, because we all know the Castira engine is a really popular engine right now, and giving a monster to your opponent's field means that your opponent will either have to go into battle phase to crush it, discard 1 of your own monsters, otherwise they will not be able to summon Fenrir. But we do play number 38 in the extra deck, so if you summon this in defense mode, your opponent is not even going to be able to switch this card to attack mode to crush it on an attacking monster, because you're going to redirect the attack to a defensive monster, so Ceruli is gonna get stuck in their field, and they will not be able to summon Fenrir at all. Now, we do play some dangers. Of course, these cards were one of the biggest supports the Darkworlds ever got indirectly. We have 3 copies of Nessie. This is the best danger because it searches you another one, so even if it gets discarded, it's always a free plus. We play 3 copies of Mothman. Now, back to what I was talking about earlier, that the timing of the structure deck is a bit unfortunate. It comes down to a card like Mothman and to Darkworld dealings, which are both really good staples in the deck, because the secondary effect of Mothman lets you discard a card after you draw a card, so you're going to get the effect whatsoever. And we all know that dealings has been in 3-of in the deck for pretty much ever. So the problem is that when you play against the Shizu Tier Elements, which is the Tier 0 deck of this current format, making your opponent discard cards can sometimes cost you the entire game, even turn 1. By giving them a free discard, you can potentially have to play 3 more interruptions that you would have to play otherwise, even on your own first turn. So there's a reason we need to play certain cards in the deck in order to make use of these cards, because cutting Mothman and cutting Darkworld dealings is going to make the deck a lot more bricky. Yes, it's not going to be technically a suicide if you use their effects against this particular matchup, but again, these cards that you have to play, so you have to make sure that you establish a certain type of card before you activate effects like this. For example, you can establish a Dweller, or you can use another card that I'm going to show you a little bit later that I use as kind of a tech to be with the current format, and also make these cards more playable. So again, we do play 3 Mothman, but you have to kind of be careful for when you use its secondary. We do play 1 copy of Jackalope. These 2 are still at 1, Jackalope and the next one, so we're going to play 1. If they ever come back to 2 or 3, then we're definitely going to play more copies of, because they're really good. They're free extenders. Jackalope special summons from the deck if it's discarded, and we also play 1 copy of Chutsinoko, which special summons itself, and we also play 1 copy of Bigfoot. I did want to play 1 level 8 monster, just because when I discard Jackalope, I won't be able to special summon a level 8 to go into number 38 to make sure that Ceruli is not going to be removable from your opponent's field to play around Fenrir, so we do play the 1 copy of Bigfoot, and it's also another copy of removal that accompany Grapha into trying to break your opponents. And we also play 1 copy of Zephyros the Elite. It's another level 4 monster that can give you back one of your dangers to use again, and go into Dweller, which is going to shut down Niseizu Tier Elements. For the spell cards, we play 3 copies of Darkworld Dealings. It's pretty standard in any deck, but again I mentioned that this card should not be the first thing you activate, especially when you don't know what your opponent is playing. If you know what your opponent is playing, something like a Runic Sprite or any other deck that doesn't really care about the graveyard, then of course feel free to activate this card. But if you know that you're playing against the Niseizu Tier Elements, or if you're going blind, then you should not activate this card first thing, because it's a card that can win you games but can also cost you games in this particular format. So you need to be able to establish an Abyss Dweller or another card before you activate to make sure that you don't lose to your opponent discarding an Ajito or a Kelbeck and getting 5 mills, milling Tier Element monsters, getting fusion plays and all that good stuff that we all know and love for this particular form. We play 3 copies of the Gates of Darkworld. Again, this card is so much better with Genta being a card, being able to have the monster you need to banish from the graveyard immediately, and of course this card is not a hard once per turn, so meaning that having multiple copies doesn't hurt you, even though this card is super searchable right now because you can activate it over and over again to be able to get more pluses with this card. We play 2 copies of Darkworld Ascension. This is the quick play fusion spell that we got in the new structure deck, and oh boy, what a card this is. So this card is not only a quick play fusion to be able to go into the new fusion monster, which is a negate, a really big monster, and a floater, but Konami made this card that you discard the cards instead of actually just sending them to the grave as fusion materials, which means it's going to trigger the Darkworld effects in your hand, so it's really, really good. Being a quick play means that you can activate it during your opponent's turn as well, and also during the main phase, if this card is in the graveyard, you can discard a Darkworld monster to add it back, so you are going to be able to trigger another effect, set it, activate it again during your opponent's turn if they're able to deal with your Overlord Grapha, the fusion monster. So yeah, this card does everything and a half for the deck. It's really, really good, and the reason you don't really need to play 3 copies of this card is because, again, we do have cards like Snow, which is going to be able to search this card. The deck draws like crazy. You're going to see one 100% unless you brick completely. And also, if you draw this card without a Grapha in your hand, it's kinda dead because the new fusion monster does require Grapha in order to summon, so you want to see this card once you set up some plays to have Grapha in the graveyard on your hand in order to be able to use this card. And also, it doesn't have to only fuse from the hand, because some would say what would happen if you don't have enough cards to fuse from the hand. It can also banish from the field or graveyard, so it's really easy to get access to it. Even if you don't have anything in your hand to discard, you can use it as a miracle fusion to be able to go into the fusion monster. Some other new cards that we got is 1 copy of Darkworld Puppetry. This card is basically a meta call. In some scenarios this card would not be great, but it's still a one-off just because it's searchable Snow. And this card, you can target up to 3 cards in any graveyard, you banish them, and you discard a Fiend. So against the Tier Elements, this card is obviously really, really good because it's basically a Mudora or a Keldo that also discards one of your Darkworlds to trigger its effect. And also, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish it from the graveyard to target one of your banished Fiend monsters, and you add it to your hand, so it also gives you some follow-up during the following turns. We play 1 copy of Darkworld Library. This is another new card. This is a continuous spell that's basically a card that's here to make sure that you keep getting more advantage every single turn, but since it's a continuous spell and a hard once per turn, you don't really need to play more than 1 copy. Again, it's searchable through Snow, and this card, you can discard a Darkworld monster to boost all your Darkworld monsters from your field by the discarded monster's level times 100, and if a monster whose original type is Fiend is discarded from your hand by the effect of a Darkworld card or by an opponent's effect, you can discard a card and draw 2 cards. So this card helps you cycle more cards and also boost your monsters. When you discard a card like Rainbow or Grapha, you're going to get your monsters so big that you're going to be able to run over everything. We play 1 copy of Card Distraction. Obviously, everybody saw this coming. There is never a scenario where this card is not going to be good in Darkworld whatsoever. It does fall under the same category of bad timing with comparing to cards like Mothman and Darkworld Dealings, because discarding 1 card against the Tier Elements might not be the end of the world, but getting them to discard their entire hand, then yes, that might cost you the entire game, even if you do have a really board, because they're going to be able to interrupt you during your own turn, even on turn 0. So yeah, it's a card that you have to be careful when you activate, because it's going to cost you when you're not careful. And because of all of that I mentioned about these cards, we did mention Dweller, that it's a card that you have to kind of set up before you activate any of these cards, but there is one more way to be able to activate these cards freely without worrying that your opponent is going plus to infinity, and it's the tech card that I've chosen to put in the deck, and it's the last card that I'm playing in the main deck. It's 2 copies of Mask Chains 2. Now, this card is a card that is obviously going to get you Darklo on the field, and we all know that Darklo is a beast against the Tier Elements because they can't do pretty much anything about the grave. They don't have access to their graveyard, which is why Dish Shifter is also a really good card against that deck, this format. But yeah, this card gives you access to Darklo, but the main thing that this card does is that it gives you free range to be able to use effects like Mothman Dealings and Card Distraction. Summoning Dweller is not always going to be very easy. It's much easier than it used to be because of Gentide being able to special summon itself when it's banished with Gates of Darkworld, but again, it's not a guaranteed thing that you're going to be able to go for it before you activate a Darkworld Dealings or before you activate Mothman's Graveyard effect. So you need another way in order to be able to prevent your opponent's effects from activating when you give them their own discards. So Mass Change 2 means that you're going to have a main deck way to be able to go into a monster that is not only going to give you access to your cards, but it's also going to give you the free wins against the tier 0 matchups whatsoever, because Darklo, if you can get it on board and if you can protect it from other stuff, it's basically game over when you're playing against the tier elements. They can't do anything without the graveyard. So I feel like this card in this particular format is a really good tech in Darkworld. In other formats, it might not be that great, but right now, it's definitely really, really good. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, you do not get your Darkworld effects because this card discards for cost. You're going to get your danger effect, so that's something, but yeah, even though you don't get your Darkworld effect, it's a really good card play in the deck right now. Moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Grapha, Dragon Overlord of Darkworld. This is the new fusion monster, and it's the boss monster what we're aiming to summon most of the time. So this card requires a Grapha and a Dark monster, so you don't even have to have 2 Darkworld monsters. You can even maybe fuse a danger monster with this card, so it's really easy to summon. And when your opponent activates a monster effect or a normal spell or trap card, while you have a card in your hand, you can activate it as a quick effect to make this card the effect your opponent discards the card. So you're basically negating an effect, and you're getting an effect that lets you discard a card. So if you discard a card like Silva, you are getting its effect again and its secondary effect because your opponent is the one that makes you discard. So yeah, this is another way to be able to use the secondary effects of your Dark Worlds. And if this fusion summon card leaves the field by an opponent's card, you can special summon one of your Graphas that is banished or in your graveyard, and then each player that has a card in their hand discard a card. So even if your opponent DD Crows both Graphas in the worst case scenario, absolutely, or if you DD Crow, if you get one of your Graphas DD Crow and you banish the other one with Ascension because you have to, you can still get them back because when this card dies, you can get back one of your banished Graphas, and also you're also going to get another discard. You're going to get a plus while your opponent is most likely discarding a card that they don't want to discard unless they're playing Isizu Tear Elements. So yeah, this card is really, really good. And Dark Worlds, they always never had a problem of being able to go for game because of how many beaters that they have. This card adds even more to that because the 32k beater you can summon with a quick play spell, and all those monsters that you have in the graveyard can keep coming back, and you basically have another body to add on to. We play 1 copy of Mask Hero Darklaw. You don't really need the second copy because you only play 2 copies of Unsearchable Must Change 2, so you have to hard draw it in order to go for it. And if they manage to deal with your board, including when you have a Darklaw, then you're basically losing anyway, so the second Darklaw in the extra deck would not be able to save you. So just 1 copy is perfectly fine. And yeah, this card in this particular format is amazing. In any deck that can play it, even besides heroes, by playing Mass Change 2, should kind of play just to have an extra chance of playing against the Isizu Tier Elements. Otherwise, decks are very, very hard to keep up with a Tier 0 deck like this. For the Exceed monsters, we play 1 copy of Abyss Dweller. It's another card that can let you activate your effects like Darkworld Dealing Card Distraction without worrying that your opponent is going to get a million effects when you make them discard. And also, if you make this and during your opponent's turn you activate its effect, your opponent is not going to be able to touch the graveyard. We do play the Zodiac package for going second. We do play 1 copy of Chaka 9, which you're going to then overlay into the 1 copy of Zodiac Borbo. You're going to attack directly, and then you're going to make your 1 copy of Zeus on top of your Borbo and have 2 effects of Zeus. Being able to get rank 4 access in pretty much any deck, you can play this package for going second. This deck, it's not that bad going second. It does have a lot of effects that can be spot removal, and it does spam a lot of monsters to be able to go into a Link Climb for access code or Nightmare monsters to deal with monsters. But again, being able to go into a Zeus so they can activate twice before you do anything else is the ideal scenario to be able to break your opponent's board efficient. And we also play 1 copy of number 38. The reason this card is much better than Photon Lord is not because of the way it negates. Being able to negate a spell, usually it's worse than negating a monster. But the thing is, when you summon this card in defense mode, you can redirect Ceruli's attack on this card, and like I said before, your opponent is not going to be able to summon Fenrir. So if your opponent plays 3 Castira Fenrir in the main deck, then they basically have 3 dead cards if you have managed to pull this off. So you are playing around a really powerful generic card with this combo, which is why this card is better than Photon Lord in this particular deck and in other decks as well. For the Link monsters, we play 1 copy of Macracker from the Underworld. This card was literally created for this archetype. Being able to discard monsters not for cost and triggering your Darkworld effects while also giving you a special summon is absolutely amazing. It does lock you into Fiend monsters, so it's not a card that you're going to summon when you're trying to go for cards like Darklaw or Appaloosa during your own turn, but when you're trying to push through a board, this card gives you a lot because you can Link Climb into this very easily with any 2 monsters, and then you get a discard for an effect, you special summon a monster. Nightmare Unicorn is a Fiend monster, so you can Link Climb into that card as well to be able to get another spot removal. So yeah, this card, it's mainly for going second, but it's a really, really good card for the deck. We play 1 copy of Dark Charmer Gloomy. Again, this is a dark archetype, so you can summon this card very easily, and we all know how broken this card is in this particular form of all those good dark monsters laying around. We play 1 copy of Masquerena. Sometimes this deck spams so much that you need to be able to make some room in order to be able to keep going. So instead of going into Appaloosa directly because you might not have 4 monsters, but you know that you need some space, you can make this card and then go into Appaloosa during your opponent's turn, or even Nightmare Unicorn. For the Nightmares, we play 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix. This deck does lack some back row removal, to be honest, because we do have Graph, of course, but when you're playing against a full back row deck, playing against a lot of floodgates can sometimes give you a bit of a problem. Not against cards like Skill Drain, because Skill Drain is a card that I was considering putting in the deck, but I feel like the deck is so fast right now that playing trap cards is not really necessary because of all the disruptions you can make, but you need some extra power against back row decks, which is why this card is good. We also play one copy of Nightmare Unicorn. I already mentioned this with Macracker. This card is amazing. You can summon it to get another spot removal and then link climb into one of the next cards, either into the one copy of Appaloosa if you need more interruptions. Usually when you're trying to establish a board and you know that your opponent is not going to be able to be in lethal range, or you can go into access code and also destroy your opponent's board with all the different attributes in your graveyard. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Dark Worlds have been rejuvenated. This structure deck was pretty much everything that the deck really needed. Konami did a fantastic job giving the deck exactly the kind of support it needed, and now we all just have to wait and see if this deck can potentially compete in this tier 0 format of ours, and I think it has a really good chance compared to a lot of other decks that used to be good but not now. They're kind of powerful. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.